Okay, hi Darren.
Hi Colin, how are you doing?
I'm all right. How are things in New Zealand? How's
Well,
the
it's
weather?
pouring down with rain at the moment.
Never happens in Brazil.
No.
Nah, only sunny days. So here we go again. We want to share these conversations with, we have naturally good conversations about all these areas that we're interested in. And this is an opportunity to share that with other people because a lot of people are interested in these things. And we're trying to pick out subjects that we have ongoing research about, we ourselves are intrigued about, we talk about, we're researching for ourselves. We kind of know that if it was Africa, where we've taken a few steps, a few steps in to Africa, but we've got our compass, we've got our map, and we enjoy swapping perspectives and discoveries between ourselves. And of course, it's a chance for people to know a little bit about the study and our approach in the study, so that anybody wants to know more and likes the approach can check out Ruby Mountain. They can subscribe to this channel first of all, and then check out Ruby Mountain on www.rubymountain.org. And we thought that we'd like to talk about the first trail, because in Ruby Mountain, there's 7 trails, which are 7 territories that we feel are very important, very interesting in these areas. And the first trail is about the unseen worlds of ourselves, and you can call it the aura, you can call it the electromagnetic field, but this territory, atmospheres and rooms, energy, radiations, emanations, all this territory. And the question we thought we'd put to each other to kind of promote the dialogue is, why is it important? Why is it the first trail? In other words, the first thing that we think is important to pay attention to. And there's multiple answers really, but we thought we'd just dive in and get into the subject of the electrical worlds of ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's a really good approach because, it's certainly all week thinking about that specific question. Why is it so important? And, just the references in history and artwork and sculpture and various writings, just really, so much of it came back as to how important it is, and certainly how important people have treated it in the past. So yeah, it's a good approach because, you can know about something. Well, here's the aura. It sort of looks like this, and it's about this size, but can be just like another topic. But why did people put such a value and importance on it in the past? And as in a lot of this work we do on Ruby Mountain, there's so much that's valuable that's kind of been discarded in the modern world that really was held to be very important for thousands of years. And I think looking at the aura is a really good example to see some of that as well.
Yeah, and it's sort of ironic that we live in a time that we're conducting electricity so well. I mean, electricity has been guided miles and miles and miles into our house. And we have the convenience of just switching a switch and light comes on. When you think about what humans lived like for so many thousands of years, and now we are conducting electricity so well, now we've got Wi-Fi. So we've gone from electricity within wires to electricity without wires, so everything's becoming wireless, literally wireless. We remember when we were kids, we never imagined a phone that was not attached to a cord. It just wouldn't make sense, right? And in a similar way, and so it's sort of ironic because here we are with all this intelligence about electricity. We're using it. Everybody's using it, even though we don't necessarily know the inner mechanics of what we're doing. And yet our own electrical system, our own energy systems that have been proven by science, we've got machines now registering our electromagnetic field, are still basically a kind of gray area for most of us, for most people.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because you're talking about electricity and energy, and obviously the human at core really is an energetic being. You've only got to look at how much our emotions affect us, how much our thoughts and feelings affect us, and none of those are physical. Those are very subtle and fine forms of energy, but have an incredibly powerful effect on us and other people.
Well, also the fact that we're feeling beings. This is the most important thing: what we're feeling, how we're feeling. It drives people to madness. It drives people to travel the world, to conquer space. All these sort of things is driven by wanting to feel something. And our feelings come in through our nerves, right? I mean, I'm looking at the physical level of it. If you touch something, a signal, it's an electrical signal. There's a chemical reaction, but it's an electrical signal travels through the body. And if you burn your fingers or have some sort of accident, you can burn the nerves, and then you don't feel. It's an amazing thing to think that you wouldn't be feeling things anymore, and then you add in sight and sound and all the other signals that get assimilated into the system. It's an incredible thing. But that's kind of like electricity within wires, because it's within the physical system. But now we know that there's an electrical, like almost like a Wi-Fi system around the human, because they're measuring the electromagnetic field. They've got a machine called a squid that detects the distance of the, if you say aura, it sounds mystical. If you say electromagnetic field, it sounds scientific and reasonable. Yeah. But essentially it's the same idea, right?
Yeah. And that's because I think what you're touching upon there too is how energy is a food. It's a nutriment for the human system. And that's one of the worst things you can do to a person is put them in a solitary confinement or a deprivation chamber where they can't see, they can't smell, they can't taste. They've got some sort of limited feeling, but it's the same feeling in that small place, and a person rapidly deteriorates. And they may be.
Are you describing the current lockdown?
Yeah, rather relevant analogy. But actually, in truth, because this is what people are finding. After a while, it's nice to have a bit of a break, but just the same routine and the same limitation on where you can go and what you can see and what you can experience. I mean, it's funny about the analogy of energy food and physical food, because we have been having these big online meetings at work because everyone's locked down at home, but the thing people are most excited about, looking forward to coming out of lockdown, is so they can go and eat takeaways again. I think home cooking's a nice change for a while, but then everyone wants the convenience of being able to buy their favorite fast food.
Yeah, and it is a food, the electrical. This is, again, why is the aura important? Because we're talking about one of the foods that the human needs to survive. We know we need physical food. If you do without it, you go without it, you can go without it for 30 or 40 days. Some people have gone longer. I had a friend actually who did the no physical food regime, just drinking water. I remember, never forget meeting her in the park. Hadn't seen her for a while, and she looked like a skeleton. I'm not saying it's the same for everybody, but she looked like a skeleton with a dress draped over her. So it didn't work for her. But most people, it's 30 or 40 days. They really have trouble. Liquid foods, we can survive about 10 days or 2 weeks, depending on the climate. Air is another type of food because we need it. It's a nutrition. So you've got the classic 4 elements of the ancients: earth food, water food, air food. That we only survive a few minutes. But electrical food is actually a constant flow. This is one of the reasons we don't detect it. It's kind of like a fish in water. We don't detect it because we're in it all the time. There's a plasma around the planet of force. There's a plasma around us of force. But because it's flowing through all the time, we don't feel it. But we see it in those monitors at the hospital, right? There's a bleep, bleep, bleep registering the electrical signal. And everybody that's ever seen a soap opera knows that moment of and no more electrical signal. then they put those electrical
Yeah.
paddles on to shock the person back into, and everyone, oh, the flow is continuing again. But the question is, what kind of flow? What kind of nutrition is that? What kind of energy? Because if we know that the quality of physical food is important to us. In fact, you think about all the books on cooking that exist. I mean, wow. And then liquid foods, everybody's got their preferences. Air, are you a smoker or a non-smoker? All this type of thing. Fragrances, there's a whole industry. But if you get to, again, to electrical food, which is the most important, considering that we can't survive a second without it.
Yeah.
How much do we actually know? We put everything into two categories: good vibes and bad vibes. I like that guy, he's got a good energy. I don't like that guy, I didn't like his energy. You know, people talk like this, don't they?
And it's such a subtle but important area, because again, that understanding of how our emotions and thoughts and feelings are very, very subtle, because, you know, they're not like a rock or something physical, but they have a very powerful effect. And I read a story when I was a teenager of a bomber crew, a Royal Air Force bomber crew, that they had engine problems and they crashed in some icy area way up in the north with very little chance of being rescued. And so time went by, they'd eaten up all the rations and the emergency food and bars of chocolates and all the rest of it. So what the captain did, he knew they were going to starve because there wasn't the physical food, and they were still holding hope for rescue. So what he did is every day, 3 times a day, he made the crew sit down with him, and they had their little sort of metal jerry can things that the military people eat their rations out of. And he went through a process of making them imagine that they were eating the most beautiful roast chicken and potatoes with gravy, you know, to really feel it and to get the whole taste and impression of it. And I think they did this for a week or so until they were rescued. And when the medical people, specialists, examined them, they were definitely in better condition than they were expected to be.
Right.
And, you know, this is the power of this subtle realm of the unseen worlds, where the kind of impressions and what they were connecting to and feeling actually did feed the physical body to a certain level. Yeah, it's just that once you start to get into this, these are the things that are so stunning about these unseen worlds of the human system. Very powerful.
Yeah, we all know the feeling of being exhausted, right? And it's like, I'm ready for bed, I'm exhausted, you know, re-exaggerating the language, I'm exhausted. And then you suddenly remember or you get some news, you know, some good news, you know, I've got a present downstairs for you, you know, somebody downstairs got a present for you, or you've just won the lottery, and the energy that floods you at that moment. And it's not like you said, oh, look, I've got to eat a roast chicken or have some candy before I get some energy to go downstairs and pick up this money or get this, you know, you're suddenly flooded with energy. So where did it come from? So it's interesting to separate this area out in general into like the area that we're talking about so far, which is really health and well-being and maintenance.
Yes.
Which is clearly important if you look at things like acupuncture and qigong, and there's a lot that circulates around energy just to do with being well. I mean, look at the surgeon treatments like Reiki and things like this that have come out recently to do with the electrical side of the human in terms of well-being. And then there's the other territory, which is to do with the possibility within that area. What can happen, because just as there's better quality foods that make you healthy, and there's some foods can make you sick, physical foods, there's definitely electrical foods that can make us ill, right? And there's definitely electrical foods that can start to raise the human up into other types of feeling and experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and just a very down-to-earth example of that, which I often think of in this particular area, is that where I live in Auckland in New Zealand, I mean, New Zealand's completely surrounded by coast because it's 2 islands. But on the west coast of Auckland, it's really rugged, there's really wild surf and it's very desolate. And, especially if you go in there in winter, you don't see many people. And, I remember going and staying at my favorite beach for a weekend, and the swimming, has such a cleansing. And they talk about the negatively charged ions in the air, which is gas level. It's like a semi-physical. But of course, there's no cars or photocopiers or cell phone towers. So quite literally your aura, your electromagnetic bubble, spending 2 days there, all the energy that you've accumulated living in the city gets flushed out or washed out, and you fill up with the charge and the energy of that natural environment and the energy coming up through the ground from the planet. And also on the west coast, it's black sand, which is iron sand. It has iron particles in it. So it really has quite a charging effect. But I remember the contrast of having this fantastic weekend. And of course, when you start to feel really, really well like that, I found walking along the beach, watching the sunset, thinking of deeper things, the meaning of life, and, really starting to connect to that more spiritual part of my life and the trace of that through the time that I'd lived. But Monday morning, going to work, going into the office, started at 8 a.m, still got to, and you've got to drive through all the traffic to get there. But within an hour or so, that feeling was completely gone. And in that particular office, the way the seating was arranged, I must have drawn short straw because my desk was right next to the photocopier. So someone's coming in, printing off 500 copies of a letter, and all this electromagnetic fumes and static just filling your aura back up. And, by morning tea time, I could hardly remember my wonderful experience at the beach. And, I'm going through that because I think most people have had similar experiences, but maybe not aware of the fact that that's quite literally your aura being filled up with something and then being emptied out and being filled up with something else. And like you say, even with our physical food, we're very careful what we eat, that it's nutritious and it's not toxic or anything that's going to make us ill. But what's not commonly understood is that it's exactly the same for the unseen worlds and what we take into our own aura because we carry it around with us.
Yeah, what you're saying there, Darren, also explains an interesting trace in world history as to why people have become more and more shut down and less aware of this aspect of our lives, the aura, the unseen worlds, the electrical side of life. Because if you think the Industrial Revolution 300 to 400 years ago, before that, people were living in nature, so they're closer to that circumstance that you're describing. Then everybody's moving into industrial cities. And literally, the proportions of the percentage of people changed into being a greater percentage in the cities. So what happens is we start shutting down our sensitivity. Our sensitivities, our nerves start shutting down when there's no good electrical food around. Just like if you hear a noise continuously, you start kind of getting anesthetized to it. You get hardened to it, If you get hit a certain quantity of times, you'll start getting anesthetized in that spot. And when something's good, we open up. We open up to let it run through our senses. So it's a kind of natural reaction. So you think of several hundred years now living in cities, the box of the house and concrete on the ground, which is basically shielding us from the radiations coming up from the earth. But it's been generation after generation. So now we're born into it. And I think children naturally feel radiations and even see the aura first few years. But of course, it's not talked about, it's not referred to. And slowly they're kind of directed into that more materialistic reality, part of reality. And so later a person it has no relevance, seems to have no relevance. And yet we feel and we know that it is an important, vital starting place for a spiritual journey or even for a well-being journey.
Yes. Because
it's to do with that opening up again. Otherwise, you can pass through your life in a kind of cocoon, you know. They have an expression in Portuguese, hard shell.
Yes, yes.
When a person's become a little bit, we have the expression in English, thick-skinned. But it's not only thick-skinned physically, it's actually a kind of like not sensing. What does a thick skin mean? It means the person's not feeling much anymore, like the heel of your foot. You know, you get that thick skin on your foot. It's not sensitive. So that opens up interesting questions like how to develop sensitivity in a safe way, which we can look at shortly.
And that was the thing that this is where history comes in again. When you mention the Industrial Revolution, William Blake, who was an English, well, he earned his living as a printer and an engraver, but he was very clairvoyant and he was very sensitive to the unseen worlds. And a lot of his work, and because they didn't have color printing in those days like we have now, and so some of the books and poems that he produced, he would print them in black and white, and him and his wife would sit up at night hand coloring them in watercolors, because the message he was trying to get across, and you know, he was absolutely convinced that something from the unseen worlds, from the natural worlds, was trying to use him to convey this message to the human race. And what his deep concern was that because of the Industrial Revolution and the materialization of everything, people were becoming disconnected and desensitized to the unseen worlds.
Yeah, and it's once you get this notion, it's interesting. You start seeing costumes and even facial markings like tattoos in a different light.
Yes.
I'm also from New Zealand. You know, one of the features in New Zealand, not only New Zealand, the Celtics did it, and other parts of the world did it. The tattooing, those tattoos, and again, this reflects the decline in the ability to see these things, because those tattoos can be seen electrically on the face. I've seen them. I don't know why I saw them particularly in New Zealand. I haven't seen them since then, but I have seen in New Zealand those actual spirals. Quite an amazing moment, because you're seeing a person talking and suddenly you're seeing spirals on the face in the same places that the Maoris put these designs. So what it says is that at some time in the distant past, these were seen, these were detected, because remember, people didn't have TVs and distraction and all this sort of thing. So they're literally spending more time using their own faculties. But somehow over time, not only the Industrial Revolution, but something's happened on the planet that the charge or the force, something that facilitated the ability to see these things has declined. And then to try to, like William Blake, to try to preserve the awareness, they went into the actual physical tattooing.
Yes.
To say, look, there's something here in case somebody's not seeing it anymore. We're going to put this to show that this is going on. But another 100 or couple hundred years down the track, people are starting to do it automatically, like we humans do. And now there's no connection back to that original reality.
Yes.
I think it's the same with the halo. You know, the halo turns up all around the world. And the Indians in Brazil particularly, there's so many tribes all around Brazil that had no contact with each other, that wore the same type of headdress for the chief, pajé, they call him, that really is like the best they could do to represent a halo.
Yes, and it's interesting, you know, because the halo's a radiation around the head within the aura, and when you were talking about the Maori traditions, that's one of the Maori traditions, that the high chief, no one was allowed to touch his head. That was considered tapu, which is the word for, you know, not allowed. And see, there's an understanding, and this came from the days before electricity as we know it. But of course, if you touch a current of electricity, this is why you get electrocuted, is because electricity will pass through you into the ground because it wants to earth itself. So just a simple understanding like that, you didn't touch the head of the chief or the holy person, because it would draw that energy away from them and into the ground, which they'd probably spent better part of a lifetime building and gathering around themselves in the first place.
Yeah. The halo is a particularly curious one, because again, there's the importance of the aura for general well-being. Because again, if you look at Tai Chi or acupuncture, which obviously we know there's something to it. In fact, in Brazil, acupuncture is now included in hospital treatments.
Yes.
I think they're even letting in Reiki because it works.
Yes.
And they've been doing it for so long because it works. So it works. But it's an electrical thing. It's to do with getting force running through the system again. But that doesn't necessarily apply any sort of higher development or any advancement, right? Because that's just like, I feel well again, so I can go and do whatever I want to do. But when you talk about a halo, they obviously were trying to indicate that this person's got some other thing switched on, something else is going on. In other words, there's a general body aura, and even auras within the aura, because the lungs have an aura, the heart has an aura, the kidneys have an aura. But this was something special. This was obviously a different level because there was more luminosity, there was more light. And again, all around the world, you can see art in the different religions, all the main religions, which had no contact with each other, but there it is appearing again. And I particularly like some religious art that has like some people with and some people right next to them without.
Yes.
And of course, today's person will go, well, it was just symbolic. But was it symbolic, or was the person actually seeing that originally in the radiation of the person?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely would be a real mark of development rather than holding up a certificate, right?
And you see some of these statues and paintings of the Buddha, where he has the radiant halo, but then also has the radiant aura as well, has both of them together. And it's, well, there's even references in some ancient sacred scriptural texts where they talk about the developed person shining like the sun and leaving no shadow. You know, it's a reference to this, because that's the thing we talk about, you know, like the example of going to the beach and certain sacred sites. There's the natural energies of this planet that we live inside of its or an electromagnetic system, but there's the energies of the sun and of the stars, which again feature very strongly in the traditions and the history of the past. These were the types of energies people were also interested in connecting to and being joined with, to fill up their aura.
Yeah, it's. I remember when I first got into this line of studies, and somebody put the idea out that, you know, how would it be tomorrow if everybody could see everybody else's aura?
Right.
Kind of like a shop window, you know, you can see what's in the shop. In other words, thoughts are being reflected. You know, even you see the old Charlie Brown cartoons, and he's all angry or frustrated, and you see that little cloud above the head, right? This really happens. I mean, in my years of teaching, there's been moments when you see a student doesn't understand, but it is instantly there's a kind of little gray cloud, like a rainy day, you know, and it appears and can disappear just as quickly when their mind clears. So it's a really incredible, moving, dynamic thing. But what would life be like if we could see that? I mean, if you could see anger building as a color, like as a gas in other people's auras, but also in your own. I mean, you would immediately, all these qualities that we know by name today, like, you know, be nice and you should be kind and try to have gratitude. It wouldn't be words. It would be that when you're in that state, let's say you're in a state of being actually patient, and your aura fills with a nice light pink, for example, that you would know it, other people would know it. Your friend turns around and says, hey, thanks for being patient with me. But then besides those things, as you say, if a person actually raises their eyes and starts to bring in solar force, which is obviously a more potent entity compared to this planet in the universe, and then star force and whatever comes out from the center of the galaxy, if those energies that became apparent in the aura, then you'll be seeing what you're dealing with. You'd see where you're having trouble, where you're establishing another levels of connection and development, and so much confusion would be eliminated overnight.
Yeah. Well, I had a real life experience of that, where my wife and I had just moved into a flat. We weren't married at the time. We'd only been dating for a couple of years. And yeah, it can be a bit frustrating moving house, and like, where have you put the toaster, and you're trying to put your life back together again. And I was in the kitchen. I was really annoyed with her about something. And she walked into the kitchen and looked at me, and I was just about to say something, and she said, "Don't you start with me." And I went, it caught me off guard. I went, "What?" She said, "There's a big patch of red energy around your head." And then I became conscious of how I was feeling. And oh yes, sorry. Yeah, obviously I got worked up about something. It's not important, but this is the reality of the human aura: is that everything you think, everything you feel, produces a color and produces an energy and a shape in the different zones of the aura.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting lady called Barbara Brennan, and she was really like an auric physician. So she'd help balance and restore people's well-being by working directly on their aura. And like a good researcher, she kept very detailed notes, and she had a friend who would illustrate things for her, who could also see the aura and see the unseen worlds. And it's an amazing journal of research, because there's, for one example, she had a picture of a man who came to her and his neck was like this. It was really painful, and he couldn't straighten up his neck. But when she looked at him, she could see this darkish ball of energy attached to the side of his neck in his aura. So, and imagine if the man had gone to the local GP, and not to put them down, but he could only do so much with the toolbox that he had, which is really kind of surgery or pharmaceutical drugs. But when she saw this, of course, she sat the man down and she worked on him, and it took a few sessions, but she gradually managed to clear this sort of yak from around his neck. And, then he came back in, and his neck was fine. No more pain, no more muscle stiffness. And because that's what it was. It was what had been lodged in his aura that needed to be removed, and then he was fine. And so, there's a whole trace through history of this idea that most ailments and diseases begin in the unseen worlds. It's just like if you're going to build yourself a letterbox or do a painting, you have to think of it first, and that's unseen. That's in the realm of thoughts and feelings. It's not till you actually make the thing physically that other people can go, "Oh, now I know what you were thinking about." So a very, very simple law that anything physical has to begin electrically in the unseen worlds first. So it's a huge, there's a whole territory just in that.
We're touching on such huge territories because, again, you can divide all this into impressions that we pick up from around us.
Yes.
And that's why we like to be in a nice ecology, and we want to go to the beach, and we want to go to the park, because we pick up nice impressions. But the other thing that the human can do is bring in force through its thinking.
Yes.
And we know this because you can be in the nicest place, but your thinking is somehow bringing in a worry, an anger, and you start to fill your aura with that you're inducting. So it's going to be, I think, a big shock is still coming for the human race, which is that our thoughts do induce energies. It's like kind of shifting radio stations, Because at the moment, people are going to think, well, you have your opinion, you can think what you like, everybody's got their own reality. But if we knew that every line of thinking, every area that you direct your mind is going to plug into an electrical force, which is going to come into your system, there would be a whole revision about the quality of thought, and not just abstractly or philosophically, but in terms of what effect it's having on you immediately.
And it's interesting, these two aspects of our auric well-being and health, and then what can enhance us to higher perceptions and feelings. This explains so much about the great pilgrimages that have existed throughout history. And the history books would say, it was a person's duty to make a pilgrimage to such and such a place. But again, looking at the unseen worlds, you take something like Lourdes, for example. For thousands of years, that was a spring coming out of the ground, deep in the ground, where people knew that when they went there, there was a certain type of energy and a certain sort of natural presence that refreshed them, that cleansed them, and did unbelievable healings for people, restored, because this is the days before hospitals and physicians and all the rest of it. And almost in every case, these ancient special sites of pilgrimage, as other waves of culture and civilization came along, they built on top of that. So Lourdes is a major center and church and buildings, premises, and all the rest of it. But that's all been built on top of what was there originally. So, the idea of certain monasteries or temples being built high up in the mountains that were away from the electromagnetic fog of the city. All of these things are because they understood the importance of being in the right place and being protected and sheltered, really, from those influences which would cause them to not have well-being, and also to distract them away from the spiritual focus that they were busy focusing their lives on.
Yeah, a person goes to these places with their sort of intuition that it's gonna give them an energy refresh, but not just a refresh like going down the local forest. There's something extra.
Right. Yes.
Hoping to get a dollop, a dollop of extra stuff that is harder to find in the general energies, even amongst planetary energies. It's interesting that here in Brazil, going into the smaller towns in Brazil, because it's not so prevalent in New Zealand, but here in the small towns, there's almost guaranteed there's a small church with a little square in the front. Being colonized from Portugal, there is this idea that the center of the town is the church, but you can trace that all the way back really to Egypt, where you had the idea of the pyramids. And if they know now that there wasn't a tomb, they didn't find a mummy in there. And most people pick up at some level, I think a lot of people pick up that it was some sort of energy machine.
Yes.
And the idea that they built such an incredible construction to induce a certain type of energy that would then allow people's electrical systems to run on a certain level. It's an incredible idea, because today it's kind of like somebody from the future coming back and finding a TV or an air conditioner that's not plugged in, and just like looking at this box and thinking, why do they, and the theories come, why do they have this box? Because if it's not plugged in, you're just not going to know what the thing is for. And it's curious that the capstone is off these pyramids, but so much indicates that not only were they some type of energy machine, but they were plugged in the past, and it caused a much more intense atmosphere, which would be cause of well-being, but would also facilitate that higher development that we're talking about. In other words, the mental faculties, special emotions being able to be maintained. Because for most of us living in a city, you have special moments now and then, don't you? You have a special joy, a special feeling now and then. But what about living in a place that was designed in such a way that you could be feeling that sort of well-being on a constant basis? It's an incredible idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And Egypt is a very, very good example of that technology and understanding being applied, because people go there today, and if they can spend time in one of those temples, they feel something. It really, really affects them. And this is thousands of years later.
Yeah.
And if you take the Temple of Dendera as an example, and that's dedicated and built around the stars and the planets and the whole larger system of the universe itself. And it's built in such a way that it has a certain star alignment. They've been very careful where in Egypt they placed, because there's another thing. If you look at where those temples are placed in Egypt along the Nile, which is very much like the human spine, it's like a giant human system laid out in the desert. It's a whole lost technology. So this Dendera temple, when you go in there, it's been specifically designed to really be tuned to a certain frequency which affects your aura and produces a state. So it's very conditioning. So the technology was that a person would be put on a certain frequency. It would cause a very, very still and fine state within their aura. And then the teachers or the priests of that temple would teach about that particular understanding to do with the stars and the planets and creation. And the knowledge, rather than just being words, there would be words, but there's a transference of knowledge, because knowledge has energy. I mean, most people know this, that if you're studying something you're really, really interested in, it's like a food. It can be very, very energizing, to such a degree that people will be passionate about a certain subject for their entire life. So in places like that, you see all of these things come together: the understanding, the importance of the aura, the unseen worlds, the connection to the planet, the connection to these more powerful forces from out in the universe.
Yeah.
And, I know where I live in Auckland, the latest thing is to knock down the classic bungalow houses from the 50s and 60s and put up 20 apartments, tiny little box like structures. And it already causes problems psychologically and to do with one's electromagnetic well-being. Humans aren't meant to be in tiny little spaces like that. So it solves an economic issue, but then just creates more issues to do with mental health and well-being, and they can't figure out why. This is why this kind of knowledge was always very, very important and really needs to be brought back into play again.
Yeah, for the individual, you can't wait for the whole of the world to bring it back onto the table as important. So if you've got an interest in your own life, your own destiny, it seems vital to pick up on this thread. And obviously what we're saying is there was a time, and so many things point to it, that where people were more sensitive, they saw these things, they felt energy more, and they gave it priority. They somehow knew that not only it's not just interesting, it's not interesting subjects, it's absolutely central to our life and our growth.
Yes.
Because if we stop growing physically at 28, what can keep growing? Well, our mind, but also our energy systems, right? But somehow it's dropped down, and now we're really in a period of main focus being the physical realms. But we know in the 60s something started to change, right? People sang songs about a vibe in the air and energy in the air, and then all this stuff came over from the East, acupuncture and meditation that nobody had heard about, yoga, all this stuff started pouring in. Today, nobody's not heard about these things. But it seems like there's a change of tide. It's like anything in nature. There's full moon and, there's high tide and low tide, and everything has its timings and rhythms. And it feels like things are starting to load again in terms of force, in terms of energy. which is great, but it also needs, therefore, new conversation, new understanding, new training, and bringing it into one's awareness, which would be a good thing to do anytime in history, but it feels even more vital right now. So, again, about the importance, if we wait for the world for it to come out in the world, we may be on our deathbed and somebody gives us a newspaper saying, we have discovered that the aura is vital for human life and development and your destiny beyond this life. So, a lot of people are feeling there's something wrong in the world, but it starts moving through into one's own life, mind, emotions, energies in the house. And also something you mentioned earlier about relationships. I find this area of the aura and energy is one of the most important to do with relationships, because go back to that example you said, somebody's loaded with some energy that it's not quite right. The other person comes in feeling good, feeling affectionate, and there's just a total mismatch of energies. So there's going to be a revolution in understanding this. So when a person's not quite clear, they're given a bit of space. I think a lot of couples do intuitively anyway, but being more aware of it would be interesting. And then finding the right zones at the right time for deeper connection. So for personal well-being, it's important, but also this area that we started touching on for certain faculties to start switching on, kind of like a remote control with a TV. For certain faculties to switch on, there has to be something going on with the aura as well. So there is a lot of this explained with exercises on how to clear the aura, how to see the aura, because again, until you start sensing and seeing for yourself, if you're not already, it can seem a little bit abstract. So in terms of, for example, refreshing your aura, you gave a great example in the story of the western beaches of New Zealand or Auckland, that if you get into nature, but particularly if you can kick off your shoes for a little bit and just compare the before and after, and when you feel like it's a relief, is it because there's an unblocking? Is it because energy is starting to flow through more? Can you put your feet into some sort of stream of water? Because that running water can aid the pulling off of any static blockages, like your story of the man with the dark ball of energy in his aura. So, time and nature is obviously very effective energy machine as well as a physical machine. Anything else in terms of easy refresh before learning specific techniques on Ruby Mountain?
Well, one of my favorite ones, which is very simple, and that story of how I felt after a couple of hours in the office after the weekend at the beach. Luckily, there was a park nearby, and in my lunch break, I would go up, stand in the grass, take my shoes and socks off, but also find a tall tree that I could put my back against. And, it's amazing with trees, we breathe out carbon dioxide and they absorb it in and produce oxygen. Well, funnily enough, they do a similar thing electrically. So kind of static and electrical toxins I was carrying after sitting next to the photocopier in the office, it absorbs that. It's a food for it. And then the radiation and the energy that the tree radiates, because it's literally plugged right down into the planet Earth, is very cleansing and refreshing. So I found after half an hour of doing that, it was like going back to work and start the day off again. Very simple, but it's this thing of being conscious of it, because unless someone points it out to you, or someone suggests it and you give it a try and you go, wow, that does make a difference. There's some very, very simple things that you can try. And I think that's the thing in feeling the difference. You build the confidence that, wow, I can actually do something about my electromagnetic state. If my aura doesn't feel great, there's something I can do about it. And as you mentioned, there's so much on the Ruby Mountain online course that we go into to really go into that in much greater detail.
Yeah. And because the brain and mind draw in forces, as I touched on earlier. Another simple idea is to, if you can't get out to a local park or whatever, is to go through the alphabet, A, B, C, and think of qualities that you really want to develop in your life, that you really want for life. And if you can think of some image, an image, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you think of something like acceptance, and you think of a flower opening up, and then you think of bravery, and you think of a warrior, and you think of confidence, and you might think of a lion, just that flash of image.
Yeah.
We love to see images, but why not use our imagination in a productive way, in a positive way?
Yeah.
So just the flash with the word. By the time you reach the end and get to zeal or Zen, and you think of a Zen master sitting there in serenity, you're going to have inducted a lot of good frequencies into yourself. And actually that exercise has a double benefit, which is you can suddenly remember some quality that you've been letting slip. So you might get the H and you think of humor, and you think of a clown or a jester, and you think, God, lately, where's my sense of humor gone lately? I just haven't been in that zone for a while. So it's like a vitamin. So that's another very good exercise if somebody wants to start with something. And in terms of like sensing the aura and seeing the aura, again, there are specific exercises and demonstrations in Ruby Mountain, the course. And this course works that there's material you can study week by week for yourself at your own rhythm. And we also have online meetings, so we can talk about things and clear doubts and train in certain areas. But besides that, to start sensing, one of the best techniques is to use the hands. The hands have obviously physical utility, but they're also very sensitive electrically. And there's a radiation around the hand, but that radiation also picks up other radiations. I'm showing where my cat scratched me. I'll use the other hand. And one of the ways to do it, if you can get a friend and one person extends the hand and the other hand of the other person goes back and forth over like this. Now, it's a very simple thing to do, but you start to feel an emanation, the emanation that comes out from the fingers. Then try the other hand that's transmitting, because then you start getting into the territory of each hand having its own polarity and each finger having its own radiation.
Yes.
And then swap with the other person and see if you can feel the difference between the hands. See what happens if you think of a color and then do the passing over, and see if it changes when you think of one color to another color. Then with practice, a person might even detect which color you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So the hands start getting more sensitive, and you can go from that exercise to flowers and trees and plants, and pass your hand over the tip of the flower or the tip of the leaf, and you start feeling the radiation that's emanating out from these lives, these organic lives. So a whole kind of curtain, a veil starts to get removed. And when you start sensing these things, then you look around at a field of flowers and you think, this, beyond the physical, there's this whole theater of pulsating lights going on here as well. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, amazing. Also, why that's a great practice is that, when I learned to play the guitar, all the chords sort of sounded the same to me, but after many years now, even if I'm hearing a piece of music, I hear a chord and I go, oh, that's a G, that's an E minor, because literally it has to get coded into your brain so that you can recognize it. And so most of us are brought up the idea that everything's physical, and you're a bit nutty if you think there's an unseen worlds or you feel or sense things. But by doing, even just starting into these exercises, it's like part of your brain circuitry wakes up and goes, oh, we're required again. We'll come back into action. And so there's a whole reawakening process of parts of our brain that we don't normally use.
Yeah, it feels right now that we've scratched the surface of the territory. It's a huge territory. I know for myself, I love the question. Why is it important? Why is the aura important? Because even though we have a trace now, 35, 40 years studying these subjects, and it is one of the first subjects that we study, it's something that, because the world demands so much of your attention to the physical aspect, it's so important to refresh and spend time in the importance of it. But it's at a certain moment it becomes very real, because you start definitively feeling the difference in atmospheres, the state of your own aura, and then that brings new challenges, dealing with other people, dealing with different atmospheres, dealing with the question of the mind and the emotions with an awareness of the electrical element. But it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe we leave it there for this chat, Darren. Good to talk on important stuff.
So again, such a fascinating subject, and each time you delve into it, it's like more things get connected together. And of course, that's why I love the question, why is it important? Because anything at all, if you start thinking about why is important, that starts to take you into a value and appreciation for it, which again is very, very important.
Yeah. Okay, I'll see you again soon, friend.
All right, nice to talk to you, Colin. See you later.